Good afternoon, cigar lovers. It's Tom here again, and the boys at Cigarsindia.in, India's most trusted and largest online retailer of premium cigars, not only from Cuba but from other places around the world, have asked me to review a very interesting cigar today. And today it will be the Davidoff Gran Cru No. 3, and it comes in a wrapper. Close to the camera. And this one actually has been aged for some time, because actually looking at the wrapper, it's got a really nice oily character, which is the residue from the cigar, which remains stored in the wrapper. And it's got a really wonderful smell. Nothing wrong with the oils or the color of this wrapper. Nothing wrong with the cigar because of this. It's just the oils which have seeped out. And because it's a natural product, of course this is going to happen. And it's a good indicator of how long the cigars have actually been kept as well. So I don't think I'll be disappointed there with this. This, I've been told, is I think it's a Claro Colorado. So it's a very light coloured wrapper leaf compared to the usual Maduros that we typically smoke. So would that impart on the flavour? Well, that we'll just see. Going on the nose of it, it's got a wonderful smell. It just smells really aged. It's got leathery tones. It's got a slightly musty kind of old library smell to it. All good signs for me. It should be a very good smoke. This is it's a Corona shape, and it's 5 inches by a 42 ring gauge. So a reasonably sized cigar, and I think should go for about 45 minutes. I'm going to try and puff away on these much more slowly to try and get as much character and flavour out of these as possible, rather than just go on them very aggressively as I usually do, and consequently being disappointed by that. So this time I think I'll just take it easy and see what develops out of this. Taste on the tongue is interesting. It's got a hint of pepperiness, but not overwhelming. The pre-light draw is very nice as well. It just feels like it's been kept really well, really nicely looked after. It's got some leathery, yeah, that leather is there. There's no pepperiness or spiciness coming through. It just feels like a very mellow smoke. Well, that's what I'll be getting when I light this up. With subtle flavours coming through, no doubt. So, while I light up this cigar, you just find out about the history of the cigar, or the particular brand. It all stems from one person actually, and his name is Davidoff. Originally from Kiev, Union, left in the century, the 1900s or thereabouts, and eventually settled in Geneva, in Switzerland. And he built a reputation for himself doing all sorts of business. Apparently he was a very charming and very knowledgeable individual, so he was someone destined to go far in his life. And in this respect, he did go very far, because he ended up traveling all the way to South America and the Caribbean, and ended up settling in Cuba for some time as well. With his charm and his knowledge and his skills, he secured quite an interest and backing from various people within the Caribbean, and especially in Cuba. So he had a large stock of cigars and other tobaccos, which through his experiences in Cuba, it was still remaining in place there. In the interim, he actually moved back to Europe, and this is the time of the Second World War. War finished, and what happened thereafter was that through his charm again and his amiability, he ended up with what was told to be the largest selection of rare and vintage tobacco and cigars from the Vichy government, which ran prior to the Nazi regime who took over during the Second World War. So he had amassed that stock, and with that stock he actually formed a partnership or an alliance with a friend of his, or became his friend, a chap by the name of, a fellow Swiss, by the name of, I'm just trying to think of his name, something Schneider. Anyway, it'll come back to me, his name, and I'll certainly mention that to you. So he had those cigars in stock, and they've set up a company based on that. But you still have to bear in mind that he still had his interests in Cuba, and the reason that's important is because his history, the Davidoff history, is also intrinsically linked to the Cuban history of that time, and not really the history of of Fidel Castro coming into power or the revolution, but much later than that, when they actually split. Anyway, that's enough history for the moment. Let me have another, or a first puff on this cigar. So light it up again. The draw is beautiful. It's on the firm side, but it's not tough. The aroma and the smoke is very nice as well. There's not much pepper coming through it. It's actually, it's hard to describe. I'm not getting much leather at the moment. There's some cream, but it's a bit on the tannic side at the moment. It has a certain pungency to it, which maybe it just needs to settle in a bit more. As I just lit it, it's probably just exhibiting those aggressive qualities. There's more toasted tobacco coming through the cigar now. So it's tannic and toasted tobacco. There's a hint of spice coming through now, but it's not overpowering by any means of the imagination. Certainly other non-Cuban cigars may have those characteristics, but this one certainly doesn't. So it's a nice balance with the spice, the peppery elements of it. Let it settle in a bit more and get back to you at the next stage. Right guys, it settled in nicely, and what I'm picking up is some beans, predominantly coffee beans. Still certainly the toasted tobacco. There's some creamy element to it, some sweetness, but again going back to that grassy kind of, more hay sweetness than grassy sweetness. And it's very mellow, it's not harsh or pungent, and it seems to be fairly well balanced, so it's pretty good so far. Going back to the history of Zino Davidoff, the person he partnered with was a chap called Ernst Schneider, he was a Swiss national, and throughout this period they did very well for themselves, and to the extent that Zino Davidoff went back to Cuba and started to produce cigars, and they modeled their cigars on the Joya de Monterrey range of flavor, profiles and character. I think that would have been one of his personal favorites at that time. So they started that around 1947, and as a reward, bearing in mind they started that around 1947, at the tender age of 63, and in 1969 he was granted one of possibly the best accolades that could be given by the Cuban government. He was granted his own brand, and hence the name Davidoff came into existence because of Zino Davidoff and his recognition throughout the Cuban tobacco industry and throughout the government and various other dignitaries that he encountered around the world. So he built a steady reputation for himself and the company and the brand with very good quality cigars and an attention to detail and production technique. The draw on this and the quality of construction is faultless. You can't say anything bad about it. This one also has some Ecuadorian leaf. And I think this is what gives the interesting piquancy to this cigar, because it has an interesting selection. It has there's a salty element which has been noted, which comes from the Ola tobacco, the acidity coming from the Chien Viente tobacco leaf, and there's that peppery element which is not very pronounced, coming from the Piloto, which is I think a derivative of some Cuban tobacco. So that combination of tobacco leaf produces this kind of interesting but toned down kind of smoke. I'm getting a lot more of the cream coming through now. The peppery quality has toned down, and the aroma is just wonderful. We're coming midway through it, and people have also commented on the fact that it starts to get a bit spicier, which I am picking up now towards this stage, and certainly at the final third of the cigar. I think that's one of the beauties of having leaf from predominantly one country. Even though I said that there are elements of Ecuadorian leaf here, there's a certain smoothness which comes with Dominican leaf, which I can certainly pick up in this. And if you don't want anything too heavy and too spicy, something kind of delicate, this certainly would be a good recommendation. I'd ensure that these cigars are very well looked after, because I think they will reward you far more significantly if they're well looked after than if you just left them out in an unhumidified condition, because I think if you leave them out to dry, they may become slightly more acrid. There is that spiciness, but there's no acridity in this particular cigar. So for me that's a good sign, because it means it's been well looked after. So I'm not picking up very much more difference in terms of flavour and the aroma. The aroma is still wonderful. It has become, well, if anything, just a bit spicier. We're trying to gauge what kind of spice, because it hits you at the back of the throat. And I think the closest approximation is Tabasco, believe it or not, Tabasco sauce. But very mild form of Tabasco, so very watered down. But that gives you a hint of what we're trying to do at the end of the day. It's just to give you an idea about the possible taste profiles, but it's really up to you to decide what flavours and characters that you can actually associate with the smoke. So, going back to actually this ties in with the flavour of the cigar. So when they were actually in Cuba, as I said, that they tried to model their particular vitolas on the Hoya de Monterrey range of cigars. And the Hoya has a very kind of particular taste. It's quite tangy and it's quite pungent. So the particular line that they launched, it was called the Chateau range, and that was based on that. So it's quite, in terms of the flavour now, it's quite potent. The Cuban Davidoff range, in terms of flavour profile, of course were Cuban, and they tended to have a much stronger and earthier content and complexity to them. Whereas here, it's far significantly lighter, and it has that sweetness, that sweet hay kind of quality to it, and a certain element of tannins as well. And I think what they did after they actually departed or decamped from Cuba was not to mimic the varieties of cigars that they actually produced in Cuba. They said, no, we're not going to, okay, that was a different kind of environment, that was a different region, the leaf was different. Let's not try to imitate that, let's do something different. So that's why this is significantly lighter, but they've done something different. It still has some overtones of a Cuban quality, but very faint overtones. And I would just say hats off to them for actually deciding to go on that brave move and depart from that Cuban profile that they originally had, simply because you have a number of cigar smokers who've grown up and experienced the Cuban Davidoff, and they were expecting that particular flavour. with the Dominican and tobaccos from the other region. So that, I think, is a good quality that they have. And this particular brand, or this particular vitola, sorry, the Gran Cru, was actually based on the first Chateau production. The particular vitola, which was launched in Cuba, they tried to have some semblance of that Chateau range of cigars, but of course departed from the Cuban leaf and the Cuban blending process. So that is a good thing, I think. It is certainly a light cigar. In terms of what would go well with it, I'd say a nice light whiskey, something like a Lowland. I wouldn't really recommend anything very sweet, because that would overpower the characteristics of this particular vitola. So, yeah, nice Lowland whiskey, something more delicate, something which is very well balanced, which would complement this nicely. This cigar, when would I smoke it? It's certainly not an evening smoke, because by the time your palate has encountered the flavors of the day with the various foods that you've eaten and the beverages that you've consumed, it would certainly affect your appreciation of this smoke. So I'd say something perhaps in the mid-morning to early afternoon. And all in all, a nice, pleasant cigar, but if you're looking for something lighter. As a rating, I would give it about 7 out of 10. Simply for the construction and the aroma. It's wonderful. It's not too overpowering in its taste. It's kind of mellow and mild, and all in all a good smoke. So that's how I'd leave it. Hope you like the review, and if you have any comments and you like what we're about, please do subscribe to our channel. Please give us a thumbs up and a like on YouTube. The boys are also on Facebook and Twitter, and they would be more than willing to help you out on your selection of cigars.